So John Mara sticking up for Daniel Jones, saying they need to do more to surround Daniel Jones and try and help him out. He also mentioned the Deshaun Watson potential, making a move for Deshaun Watson, said not happening, listed salary cap reasons, but also the situation going on behind the scenes with Deshaun Watson. So, I mean, this seems like, well, I guess they're just going to roll out Daniel Jones, no matter who their head coach is. They're just going to roll out Daniel Jones, and he's going to be their guy next year, Brady Quinn. We're good here. Everything's solved.
Yeah, I do think there's one thing that could roll back or maybe somehow put the toothpaste back into the tube, and that would be, what else if you could take your 2 top 10 picks and you could trade for a guy like Russell Wilson, where we know there's a desire to get out of Seattle. He wouldn't have floated, or his agent wouldn't have floated what was floated out there last offseason. And we know Pete Carroll and John Schneider are back. So now it comes down to, and they can say, hey, we're not going to move on from this guy all they want. But if there's a desire on his side of things, what if the New York Giants offer him those 2 top 10 picks in a year where, look, maybe they, in exchange it's Daniel Jones too. And you've got, a potential quarterback. You've got some top 10 draft picks. You could take another one if you want or build on that roster. I mean, Seattle's another team that, if you move on from Russell Wilson, or if you really look where this team is at, they've got some pieces, but there's a fair amount of rebuilding to do. Their defense has been awful. They finally moved on from Ken Norton Jr. Bobby Wagner is still there, but there's some speculation as to whether or not he'll be back. And those are really the last 2 pieces, Russell and Bobby Wagner, from their Super Bowl winning / back-to-back years going to Super Bowls. And if you move on from those pieces, you're essentially rebuilding. So I do wonder if there's a little thought or motivation on the side of the Seahawks. We know there is from the side of Russ, but the Giants are that team with draft capital to make that sort of move, to make it happen. And if you bring in an offensive-minded coach like a Brian Daboll, and look what he's done with Josh Allen, imagine what he could do with Russ. And imagine, there's all this talk about the offensive line and, people talking about what they're going to do there. Well, Russell has been played probably behind worse offensive lines throughout his career. I mean, it immediately makes you an NFC East division contender, a playoff contender, with all the talent that's around that quarterback spot. So it sounds all good when you listen to what John Mara is saying, but that's why in the NFL, you seldom hear people use the words never and always, because if that opportunity presents itself, if you're the Giants, if you're John Mara, how could you turn that down? How could you say no to that? And if you pass up this offseason and Russell Wilson moves somewhere else, moves on, and then after this year the Giants decide that, well, maybe Daniel Jones isn't the guy, let's go back in the draft, you just missed out on getting a guy who's won a Super Bowl. I mean, to me, I think if that opportunity presents itself with everything that John Mara has done, where I think he pulled a 180 from the disappointment he explained, David Gettleman resigning, keeping Joe Judge, and they kind of backtracked off that. Well, now they're in a much better spot. You got Joe Shane as the GM candidate, GM. You got potential, one of the hotter head coaching candidates coming in that's going to revive this team, at least offensively. And now you've got the potential chance to get a franchise quarterback who, it's not like he's in his late 30s. Russell Wilson still has a lot of good football left in him. I just think if that scenario played itself out, you'd have to walk back all the comments he said kind of in defense of Daniel Jones, would you not?
Well, that's why I was oofing during the statement. I mean, are they committed to Daniel Jones or not? And the first thing I started to think, just listening to you right now, is I wonder whose decision it was to bench him at the end of the year and go in a different direction altogether until the season's end. Were you preserving him or were you moving on from him? And if I'm looking at Joe Judge, of course he would have to be looking at it as I'm moving on from him, because you're not having a level of success as a head coach, and you knew that things were looming if you didn't have success with Daniel Jones. And it turned out to be, correct. So where you're at right now, whoever it is that comes into this job, you've already seen Daniel Jones in so many ways, regardless of what John Mara says. In so many ways, your quarterback is one of the main reasons why this team is not playing or doing better. I mean, it just is what it is, regardless of if it's because the team hasn't been able to live up to the expectation or the standard of developing him when they get him. They haven't had much time. How many years did Joe Judge get? What, 1, 2?
2.
2 years? All right, and then the coach before him. It wasn't long.
Was it Shermer? And then before him was Ben McAdoo, who got a couple of years.
McAdoo didn't get a long time either.
No.
So the idea of it is okay, if I take this job in New York, Daniel Jones is not giving me very much runway. So you got to believe that there's not a coach that's coming in that's like, yeah, I can salvage this with Daniel Jones. Let's make this work. You got to be looking at what can I do or what can this team do to put me in the best situation to improve this team as quickly as possible, because regardless of what the ownership is saying, you see what happens when they feel embarrassed. And if they find themselves in an embarrassing situation, they're going to act on that. And if they're going to act on it, I'm going to want who I want in at that position in particular if I'm going to take that job. So I wonder what that conversation looks like with the possible coaching candidates and league candidates in terms of entertaining the conversation of if it's Russell Wilson. If you're not entertaining Deshaun Watson, then why not entertain the Russell Wilson opportunity?
Well, again, if it's there, there's a lot of working parts, right? And who knows how that'll transpire, but you got to hire the head coach. And I wonder if, and Brian Daboll has been reportedly been the hot name that people are talking about, but he's been looked at for 2 jobs, Miami as well as the New York Giants. And if he's deciding between both, I'd be curious to see if behind closed doors the conversation is, yeah, Daniel Jones is going to be your quarterback for year 1. And then if things don't work out, after you evaluate him for a year, you can go another direction. Whereas in Miami, it's Tua Tagovailoa. And why is that significant? Do you remember when Tua came in to help Alabama win a national championship, who the play caller was?
Yep.
Brian Daboll.
Yep.
So there's familiarity there as opposed to maybe a question mark, and that could be good or bad, right? It's like the mystery box in Family Guy. Like, you can have a boat or you can have the mystery box. Like, and it's too enticing. Like, I don't know. It could be anything in the mystery box. Could be a boat. In one case, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into, and because you've been with the player before, you've coached him before. And in another case with Daniel Jones, maybe he's the guy, maybe not. But the mystery is that it could end up being someone like a Russell Wilson. But it doesn't sound like that's the direction their owner wants to go. So, I mean, and that's the hard thing is I think there's a chance that they would end up missing out on it. And then that doesn't make it look like as an attractive of a job, does it? I mean, you're going to be tied to the quarterback in either instance.
I don't think it's attractive to go in there and have Daniel Jones. I feel like it's sad to say that because I understand. If there's anyone that can understand what Daniel Jones has gone through in terms of a player, I had more head coaches than years in the league at one point. And I had a defensive coordinator, a different one. For the first 3 years, I had a different defensive coordinator. I finally had one for more than 1 year, and then he was gone after 2 years. I never had a defensive coordinator or a coach for more than 2 years in my entire NFL career. So I can sympathize with where Daniel Jones is in his career and how that can impact your success and your development in the game. But with that being said, woe is me. The idea of that is that's fine and that's all good, but I'm not trying to be victimized by your circumstances. And it seems to have already been a part of other coaches that have come there to coach. I don't want that. I just don't want that. If I'm a coach coming in, I do not want to try to salvage it with Daniel Jones. So now the idea of it is who's out there, who can we bring in, what's feasible.
I mean, do you think Joe Shane got the memo from Giants ownership that, hey, you're going to be stuck here with Daniel Jones? That's going to be your guy moving forward?
Or maybe that was the selling point, that they can make it work with Daniel Jones. I think that ship is sailed.
If it were up to me and I were Brian Daboll, I'd rather go to Miami and work with Tua because not that, Tua's got, a higher ceiling than Daniel Jones. I think there's more untapped potential. What we've seen from Daniel Jones, he turns the ball over way too much. He's got about this weird neck injury that he went through last season to where, it was reported as a strain, but now he had to go on IR, and now he's going to, rehab, but he should be back in time for August, which, I don't know. I feel like I've strained my neck before. It doesn't take 7 months for a neck strain to heal. It feels like you're kind of tying the head coach or the GM to what you're adamant about in a press conference in January, that you're tying them up for a year when you've proven over the past 3 coaching regimes, you get 2 years or less, and if you don't perform, you're out of here. It just feels like that's a tough spot for whoever's going to take that gig. I don't know.
I think it's a tough spot if they feel beholden to Daniel Jones. And I get it. They made the investment. They feel like they've botched how it's gone. But, LaVar hit the nail on the head. He's consistently shown an inability to take care of the football, whether that's through interceptions or fumbles. It's been the thing. And look, coming in to the NFL, that wasn't like a knock on him. It wasn't like he was a guy you're concerned about ball security. One of the pros about him was he's a smart, player. He can run an NFL system. He's athletic enough. He can move around. We've seen that from time to time. He was well coached. Coming from the system there at Duke, it was everything but kind of at least the turnover thing. That was something that was a knock on Jameis Winston, and we saw it rear its ugly head. But after watching what he looked like with the Saints last year, it seems like he's got that under control. He showed growth, maybe too late for other people to buy into that. But that's the concern with Daniel Jones is he just kind of revealing to you what he is, regardless of all the things around him, or do you ultimately believe that it takes the right coach to be able to make it work? Maybe that is the case, but I think you've got a much better idea of what he is. And if that's the case, then you got to start looking up to go make a big home run swing of a move and try to find someone like a Russell Wilson.